that teaches you to depend upon another race is a leadership that will enslave you. Any leadership that teaches you to depend upon another race is a leadership that will enslave you. They gave leadership to our foreparents, and that leadership made them slaves. But we have decided to find a leadership of our own.
Not your average nigga, I'm a god out the hood. They can't downplay me, I came up, I'm elevated. I ain't gotta say too much for them to know I'm coming for what's mine. You know they see me in my presence, say they see how I'm coming. Young, but you not just gonna finesse me like you did my peoples. Then back when you said they was emancipated. This ain't that. Your head too big, you feeling yourself. The game wasn't fair, you had the advantage, we wasn't educated. I don't look at you people the same. Nah. Your worst nightmare, my skin tone about them chains. Yeah. Not no circus lion, son, I can't be tamed. You gon' have to kill me, pussy, Toby ain't my name. Y'all still want us think our history started when we were slaves? What? Come on now, talk about them pyramids we made. I was chosen by that man, you know y'all just been running game. The nerve of you acting like...
All right, family, this is your brother King Cam, and welcome back to another action-packed, powerful, shifting the culture episode here on my podcast, Shifting the Culture, family. So again, man, thank you for coming through. We appreciate everybody. Now, I want to just let you know that for some odd reason, the permission to be able to stream on Facebook was denied for whatever reason. I'm not exactly sure why. Either way it goes, we still got our YouTube family. We still have our Twitter family tuning in. So just in case, and I posted it out on Facebook to join us over here on YouTube so that you'll be able to check out the live broadcast. If not, then you'll have an opportunity to watch the replay. But tonight, family, we are going to be discussing Hip Hop Turns 50, and I have a special guest with me who's going to be helping to navigate us through that dialogue. Hip Hop Turns 50. Now, a lot of people have been aware of Hip Hop turning 50. You've seen people like my son speak on hip hop. You've seen people like Fat Joe. You've seen a bunch of different pioneers in hip hop speak on the fact that hip hop has recently just turned 50 years old, and they talk about the impact of hip hop on their lives, the impact of hip hop on the culture, and how it has transformed the culture in so many different ways. And there's so many different opinions on hip hop today. I thought this conversation was especially needed probably 3 weeks ago, but I definitely wanted to make sure I brought this brother on so that we can have this conversation, because it's extremely necessary to add to all of the many perspectives that are out there in reference to hip hop turning 50. So I need everybody who is in the comments section to let me know what city and state you're from. YouTube, I need you to smash the like button, and I need you to subscribe. I need you to smash the like button, and I need you to subscribe to the channel so that we can have more people check us out, so they can see all of the cultural shifting conversations that we have here each and every Tuesday night at 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, family. So without any further ado, I would like to bring my good brother to the stage now, a strong brother in the student ministry here in Atlanta, Georgia. Brother who has been soldiering in the Nation of Islam for a very long time. Brother has served in many different capacities throughout the Nation of Islam, has been serving the community for a very long time as well, working with our youth and with our children, and just being a mentor, big brother, husband, father, and just a kind shoulder and ear to lean on and to speak to, but also to go to for solid advice. This brother is also very, very, very knowledgeable about hip hop, and is able to run down for us the history of hip hop, and from his perspective, how it has transformed life. But here's a caveat to what we're going to be discussing today. It's not only about hip hop turning 50, but hip hop turning 50 and the Farrakhan Factor. I'm going to say it again. We're going to talk about hip hop turning 50, but we're also going to include the Farrakhan Factor. And that is very important, family, because the reason why I wanted to bring my brother to this platform is because he's going to help tie in the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan and the ministry of his, and how it has factored into hip hop, impacted hip hop, changed hip hop, and what the enemy did to remove that influence in it to what you see today. So, without further ado, want to bring my brother, Student Minister Jamoul Muhammad. Please give my brother a virtual round of applause. All praise is due to Allah. All praise is due to Allah. So, Brother Jamoul, man, thank you for joining us here on Shifting the Culture, Black man. We appreciate your time.
Man, thank you for having me, brother. It's truly an honor and a pleasure to be on your platform, our platform. Thank
Yes,
you
sir.
for sharing it. Yeah.
Yes, sir. Absolutely. Absolutely. And like I was saying, man, you are a very, very special brother in so many ways. Well, when it comes to this particular conversation or this topic, you have a knowledge base in reference to the connection of the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan, the Nation of Islam, in hip hop. And I wanted to bring that to the inject that, if you will, into the conversation about hip hop turning 50, because there's a lot of conversations about hip hop, how it transformed lives and how it impacted the culture, but nobody's talking about the Farrakhan factor. So of course, if nobody's going to talk about the Farrakhan factor, who else better to talk about it than the students and the helpers of the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan?
That's right.
Yes, sir.
Absolutely.
Yes,
All
sir.
praises due to Allah. Yeah, in the name of Allah, the Beneficent, the Merciful, I bear witness that there is no God but Allah, and that Muhammad is indeed his messenger. To you, my brother, and then all of your listeners, I want to greet you in the universal greeting words of peace and paradise. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam, sir.
Man, hip hop is very, very near and dear to me, as it is to a lot of people. Man, happy birthday, hip hop, turning 50.
Yes, sir.
And it goes without saying, the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan is the reason why I'm sitting here in the capacity that I'm sitting here in. And the relationship between hip hop and the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan is what helped save my life. Amongst other things, right? I have a life story just like everybody else. But the connection of the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan and hip hop music is something that became very, very obvious to me, just by a few seeds that were dropped on me, matter of factly, right? But we know that God does not work in mysterious ways. He works in intentional ways through men and women.
Yes, sir.
And so, I really, this subject matter is really so close to me because I lived it. You know what I mean? I grew up under it. It helped nurture me. So
yes, sir.
I'm so excited to talk about it.
Yes, sir. Absolutely, brother. And again, that's why, I specifically wanted you on to talk about it, because of your personal connection. It can definitely resonate with the people. So let's just begin with hip hop in general. Obviously, we know hip hop originating out of the Bronx, New York. Shout out to the Boogie Down Bronx.
Right.
Yeah.
So
gotta shout out the Boogie Down.
That's right.
Yes,
and so
sir.
did the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan. For those of you who don't know, he was born in the Bronx as well.
Wow. Look at that. Yeah. Right off the bat. We connecting the dots. But yes, sir. So could you speak to, how hip hop has impacted you and the significance of hip hop turning 50?
Well, hip hop has impacted me because it's the soundtrack of my youth soundtrack, and I'm still young, so it's the soundtrack of my life. When education and the things that were influential over young people in previous generations to mine started to become less and less persuasive and impactful. Hip hop music was a medium of exchange of ideas that kind of filled the gap where school and church and listening to your elders was previous. Hip hop music, our peers, sports entertainment, and those things became front and center. But it was the influence of hip hop in the 80s and the consciousness of it that really was able to grasp the attention of me and my peers. And I like to tell people I was born in the '70s, but I'm a '70s baby. The '80s raised me, and the '90s made me. Um,
Yes,
and
sir.
and we and we're talking about some really really influential and developmental years in hip hop music in particular. Um, but also the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan,
Mm.
post the 1975 fall of the Nation of Islam, and his, you know, re showing the world the work of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad after 1975 is weaved in and out of my life, as well as hip hop music being the soundtrack of it. So I was born in 1977, and that, that was the wake
Mm.
of the fall of the Nation of Islam. Hip hop was only 4 years old, but that's the year the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan decided to stand back up
Stand back
uh,
up.
and rebuild the work of the Most Honorable Elijah Muhammad and the Nation of Islam. So I don't know life and times without hip hop or the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan, and the energy and the impact the the high frequency in the word of the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan was also deposited in the music, right?
Right,
Um,
right.
so the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan, in my opinion, has impacted every facet of Black life, but in particular, um, the hip hop culture and the music, which was so influential to young Black men like myself, who had a lot. Not that young Black men don't have a lot to contend with today, um, but we were fighting the crack epidemic, mass incarceration, teenage pregnancy and fatherhood, fratricidal homicide, and violence in our communities. And I think back, like, man, how did I make it? And it's three things that stand out: good parents, hip hop music, conscious hip hop music, right? And
Yes,
the
sir.
Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan. So that's the impact and that's the basis that I see this subject matter from.
Yes, sir. Absolutely. And you mentioned a couple of points, and you mentioned a couple of, or you alluded to really a couple of different events that were
Yes,
taking place. And the 90s in general was a very important time in history. You had a
yes,
lot
sir.
of monumental things taking place. You had a lot of, spill over from the 60s civil rights movement spilling over into kind of the 80s and the 90s, where consciousness was reemerging, unity for Black people was reemerging, especially coming off of the heels of the crack epidemic in the
That's right.
80s, right?
That's
So
right.
you had that aspect that's taking place, and hip hop played a very important role. And because you had groups like Public Enemy, you had
Right.
groups like why am I forgetting Ice Cube and
Mhm.
the
Right.
NWA? So you had
NWA.
NWA, you had Public Enemy, you had Tupac, right?
Right.
If you know any of Tupac's background, it's a revolutionary background. The
Right.
FOI, very influential with a lot of these hip hop artists. So could you help navigate us through some of those important times coming off of, let's start with the beginning or the heels of the crack epidemic and the infusion or the influence really of the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan in hip hop in the 80s with groups like with Public Enemy and such.
Yes, it would be my pleasure to go there. But it really, let's go back a few years earlier, right?
Hmm.
So the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan stood back up to rebuild the Nation of Islam in the late 1970s and 1977, right? And that's when you started to see hip hop music begin to come out of the Bronx, and become a real force and power of an underground culture. And then when we see, and right at the beginning of the 80s, 1980, you saw the first commercial hit with the Sugar Hill Games rappers Delight. But that was like hip hop music bursting out of an underground scene, and making commercial exposure, right?
Right.
That's a year later, in 1981, in early 1981, the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan um, conducted our first Savior's Day, which was really like sticking the flag of
The
Islam back
flag.
in the sand, letting everybody know that the Nation of Islam is back.
It's back. Yes,
Well,
sir.
after being underground, just like hip hop, right? After
Yes,
being
sir.
underground for a couple of years with the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan building it, in ignominy, right? And then right after that Savior's Day, you saw the first really blockbuster conscious hip hop song, "The Message," by you know DJ Grandmaster Flash and the Furious Five, with the famous hook, "Don't push me because I'm close to the edge. I'm trying not to lose my head," which was a song talking about civil unrest and the dissatisfaction that Black people and brown people were feeling in the inner cities. Well, that message was
Come on.
in the word of the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan, right?
Come on.
And then we see the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan surround his brother and friend Jesse Jackson, who was running for president.
That's
and
right.
then and as a result of that, he was pulled into a controversy that pulled him out of just being a charismatic leader of a group. Now he was a very conscientious man of principle, whether you agree with it or not, whether you deemed it controversial or not. Now he has the spotlight on him.
Absolutely.
As we start to see hip hop music, start to evolve away from the DJ being the focal point. Now you have the MC being the focal point. So this is 1984, 1985,
Right.
which ushered in the golden age of hip hop music. But what we saw through the ministry of the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan is that he was divinely inspired to peep game on a conspiracy against young Black people in the inner cities in America, in particularly young Black men, on the heels of his what he calls a vision-like experience, where he said he was taking, and we believe this wholeheartedly, taking up on the wheel and received instructions from the Most Honorable Elijah Muhammad.
Yes, sir.
But what we see here is that now there is direct and intentional connection between the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan and Black youth, which is now spilling into the culture and into the music, because people are listening to the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan, not only because of the truth in what he is saying, but because of the controversy that pulled him into media mainstream limelight, because they wanted to discredit the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan. And the same thing is happening to hip hop. Hip hop music is deemed not music at all. It's violent because it promoted a masculine, very speaking truth to power Black male figure, that was out front, right? And then a very, very strong Black female presence as well, working in concert with each other. So we're starting to see literally a rise,
Right. Come on.
in the people, right, in young people, on the heels of the fall of the Nation of Islam, as the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan is starting to rebuild it. And you see the music and how it is impacting. We started to wear these T-shirts with Black heroes on it, Africa medallions, right? We had kufis and fezzes on. Red, black, and green was the color scheme, and everybody was talking about upliftment and stop the killing, and self-destruction, and what we need to do to really unite as a community. And simultaneously, the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan is crisscrossing the country on what he called the Stop the Killing tour. So now this is in the 90s.
This is in the 90s. This is in the 90s where he starts to Stop the Killing tour.
Right. So and this is where we see inner city crime during and on the increase on the heels of the crack epidemic and other facets of Black life that were negatively impactful on all of us. And then you started to see how we were portrayed in movies like Boys in the Hood and Menace to Society. These images were all going all over the world. Right. And it was the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan who said in many of his Stop the Killing tour stops is like, to stop the, if you want to stop the killing, you got to stop the killer. So he was focusing our mind on the principle behind what was making us so
Yes, sir. You absolutely right. And I wanted to stop you right there because I wanted to kind of stay right there for a minute,
Okay.
because that's a real pregnant point that you brought up in reference
Right.
to Boys in the Hood, Menace to Society. You talking about when the minister came out of the Vision Like experience in 1985 and mentions
correct.
the fact that there is a plan or a plot against black people, but specifically black men.
That's
Young
right.
black males were the target of the United States government. This is
That's right.
very important, family. And the Honorable
Very.
Minister Louis Farrakhan exposed that coming out of the White House from under the leadership of the president at that time, George Bush, and then going over into the Clinton era. So
Right.
you come out of the crack era, which is Reaganomics, right? And then you
Right.
get into Bush, and then you get into Clinton. And I thought
Right.
that is extremely important to what we're discussing tonight, because obviously we know hip hop turns 50, but this is a point in time where you see the police coming into the community off of the heels of the crack epidemic. They pour crack into our communities, right? And then they increase police presence to lock down or crack down on the violence that's been increased from the drugs. But you have a
Right.
lot of young black men who are making money.
Right.
You have a lot of young black men who are making money from selling drugs, and you see how hip hop is influencing the culture. You have the drug money, which is influencing hip hop. So you have a lot of like Run DMC, and a lot of the drug dealers is emulating Run DMC. So you have Adidas that is really popping off right now. All of the drug dealers, everybody that was selling crack in Harlem, you know what I'm saying, had Adidas tracksuits. So, you know what I'm saying? If you watch Paid in Full, you know what I'm talking about. So
Right.
that was just an imitation of what the Supreme team was doing. See,
Right.
all of this is real life that they put into movies, are imitating life. And the minister is going around the country, as Brother Jamal mentioned. He's going around the country putting us on notice to let us know that what is happening is that they are treating and considering us a real threat, and they are painting us and putting us in context so that they can be justified in the murder of young black men. So what you see going on in the hood, they cracking down, the police beating us up, killing us, police brutality, domestic terrorism, all of these different things taking place is on the is coming out right after the minister saying that there's a plot against young black men. And all of this is tied in together. Drugs, hip hop, the culture, everything is tied in together. But the minister's infusing a message to help raise us up and to help put us up on game.
Right. To warn us.
Yes,
right?
sir.
From R&B, not R&B music, Reagan and Bush.
Right.
Reagan and Bush
Yes, sir.
the Reagan and Bush administration, right? You know, he was warning us. He never diminished the idea of young black men organizing themselves into street organizations, aka gangs. He just was like, you got to change the idea behind it because it is so necessary, because there is a plot against you. And to your point, my brother, the hip hop community was listening, because not only were they listening, they were putting it in the music, not because the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan was saying it, and this is well documented. It is because it was true. So what he was saying on through one approach of emceeing, right, through a bully pulpit, like a studio of what you would say your favorite MC might use.
Yes, sir.
Your MCs was putting it in their music because it was true, right?
They was living it. They was living it, and they had homeboys that was living it.
Right. So now you have a synergistic relationship between the truth and what the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan was preaching, which is unlike anything else anybody else was saying, matching up directly with the truth in what a lot of our brothers and sisters was putting in the music.
Everyday life.
Everyday life. So you had younger generations like myself who was coming up under this, right? Looking at the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan, being interviewed by some of the media's best minds, right?
Donahue,
Barbara Walters,
Larry King.
Yeah, Ted Koppel and all of he was lining them up like the famous Rakim line. Give me 7 MCs and put them in a line.
Yes, sir.
Go get 7 more that think they can rhyme, and it'll take another 7 before I go for mine. And that'll be set 21 MCs 8 up at the same time. Well, that's the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan taking on all comers, not only just through his lectures, but through his books, his writings in the Final Call newspaper, right?
Yes, sir.
And then his being interviewed in front of the world with an invincible message because it was true and was given to him by his teacher, the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, who also was the father of a lot of of most of the consciousness that was in the music, because our cousins, right?
Yes,
our comrades in the same fight for freedom, justice, and equality, members of the Nation of Gods and Earth, aka the 5%ers, a number of them were lead MCs in groups like Brand Nubian and Wu-Tang Clan and others, right? That was putting the same message based on the same teachings in the music, teaching the youth and the masses of this great word that has developed, so many of us under the leadership of the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan. So it's like we were kissing cousins, or brothers and sisters, literally. You got the FOI and MGT, right, in the community working on it, and then you had the brothers and sisters from the hip hop community working on the enliftment. Hip hop, right, was affectionately called high energy, positively healing all of our people, right? That's an acronym, and forgive me if I didn't say it correctly. That's an acronym given to the name hip hop by Professor Griff, after hip hop was named after an anecdotal story of one of the pioneers having to go off to war. Well, there was a war going on inside of these streets for the lives of our people.
Wow.
So I mean, so the fight and the warning and the going after our people is hand in hand with hip hop music and the message of the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan.
Absolutely, absolutely. And family, if you just tuning in, this is your brother King Cam, and I'm host of Shifting the Culture podcast. And tonight we're talking about Hip Hop Turns 50, the Farrakhan Factor. And I have with me a special guest by the name of Student Minister Jamoul Muhammad, who is a child of hip hop, and is here to discuss with us the impact and the Farrakhan Factor and influence in the hip hop community and hip hop culture. So what I need you to do, family, if you're watching from Twitter, I need you to retweet. If you're watching from YouTube, I need you to smash the like button, and I need you to make sure that you comment, but also hit that subscribe button so that you can stay subscribed to the channel. So
and that's high infinite power healing our people.
Yes, sir. Infinite power healing our people is the acronym for hip hop. So this is very, very important. This is very important, family, because we're going to get up to 2023. I know a lot of people want to know, well, how did hip hop get to where it's at right now? Right. So we're gonna get there, but this part is very important. So okay, so now we are in the early 90s. And we have the minister who, again, is putting us on notice, the world on notice, and the government on notice that he's aware of the plot against young black men, young black boys. You have the Clinton administration who's coming in. Now, what a lot of us didn't know at the time, and we come to find out later, is that there's a lot of politics being played in the background. There are a lot of high-ranking officials. There are a lot of powerful individuals who have their eyes on the black community, specifically young black men. So you have the rise of incarceration, what is called mass incarceration. Right. So because the Democrats were looking to become more tough on crime, they were losing to Republicans such as Ronald Reagan, Richard Nixon in the late in the 70s, in the 80s. They're losing to Republicans because their stance is not strong enough in public eye against crime. So fast forward to the 90s when Bill Clinton runs for office, he takes a tougher approach on crime. So what happens is once he wins the election, in his in his campaign, he pledges to be a lot more tough on crime and pledges more funding to police departments. Well, they claim that it's supposed to go against crime and violence. They have, and they talk about, cleaning up the community, reducing the war, because it's supposed to be a war on drugs is what's happening, right? So they pledge more funds to the police department, and ultimately this militarizes the police. So what happens is now you come into the famous line of Hillary Rodham Clinton, who calls young black men super predators.
That's right.
All right. Super predators who have to be brought to a heel. So you have the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan defending black people and black men in particular and warning us that the government wants to destroy us. But you have the Clinton administration in particular labeling black men as super predators that need to be brought to a heel and need to be put away for life, because Bill Clinton is famous for the 3 strikes. Say that again.
The crime bill.
Yes, sir. The 3 strikes. Yep. And the 94 crime bill, which increased mass incarceration. But what did the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan do? The Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan said, wait a minute. We going on tour and we going to say, stop the killing.
That's right.
So now take us into stop the killing, Brother Jamal.
So stop the killing is in fact where I first heard the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan, April 28th, 1990, in my hometown, Atlanta, Georgia, in the Omni Civic Center. For those of you who know Atlanta,
yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Packed, and
that was like 20,000. That was like 20,000 in the Civic, wasn't it?
Yeah, that was 20,000 in the Omni.
Yes, sir.
And inside, outside, sitting in the aisles, and it was a fire hazard that night. That's how many black people came out to hear the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan.
Come on.
Atlanta and in other cities. And that particular lecture was called "Add It Up." So when you dissect that lecture, his warning for stop the killing is also a clarion call for what a lot of people are looking into as the basis for reparations. The Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan has been standing for that call and has really templated and laid the basis of what real reparations looks like for black people here in America. But when you start to see the war on drugs take a turn, as you described, with the crime bill and the funding the police and over militarizing the police.
Yes, sir.
We start to see a change in direction with Bill Clinton coming into office because of the fear of a black planet. Like Public Enemy's studio album was called "The Fear of this rising, conscious, more militant black youth that was attempted to be dealt with coming out of the 60s and 70s after the riots." We see it here coming in again. Riding after the beating and the
Rodney King
of the Rodney King police officers. Right, this is in the early 90s. You see Bill Clinton in office. He's vying for the black vote, right, by going on the Arsenio Hall show, playing the saxophone, and America's calling him
a black president,
the first,
first
black president.
I remember that.
And then you start to see the movies start to take more of a turn, where now Spike Lee puts out the biopic epic movie Malcolm X, and to try to contend, not only educate about Malcolm X, obviously, but also try to contend with the consciousness and the living presence of the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan amongst the people. But black men are in peril at this time. So we go from the Stop the Killing tour to the All Men's meeting,
right,
where he this where the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan was divinely inspired to talk specifically to
The men.
young men,
That's
right,
right.
in these
That's right.
communities who are suffering and falling into the trap of the war on drugs because it's big business,
That's right.
right? To fund the police, militarize them, send them into the community, and lock young black men up, put them in jail. Jails are becoming privatized now, right? So they're blips on the American economy and the stock market because they're privately owned. So it's big business. Crime, fighting
Pays.
crime, supposedly is big business. So not only do you see the over militarizing and the funding of the police, you see what we always knew, right? What the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan had alluded to for several times, that it is the police and those that are sworn to protect and uphold us are some of the ones that are keeping the crime going, keeping the drugs going, keeping the guns going,
Yes, sir.
because to keep that cycle of violence in our community means more money, right?
Yes,
Because there's
sir.
more of us that's going to jail. There's more of us that's getting locked up, and that money is flowing in from the federal government into the local and state police departments. And so we are caught up in this cycle, in this trap. And now what you start to see in hip hop music is the record companies and big corporations start to turn the message in hip hop music to from what NWA was reporting about truth about what police brutality and what was going on in their communities. Now they have turned it into its own subgenre in hip hop music called gangster rap. That's not
Oh,
even
wow.
that's we don't even talk like that gangster rap. We don't even talk. That's what the media called it. And so now
Wow.
that's being financed and now that's being promoted. Hip hop music from the lowest form, from the lowest energy, from the lowest vibration is being pushed in front of the people. So now conscious hip hop music is being pushed out, right? You can't get a record deal if you're talking about protecting, women, elderly and the children and cleaning
Hmm.
up your community. No,
Hmm.
you got to be talking about, doing things that are left-handed business,
Right.
right? Selling drugs and pimping your women and all of these different things that we started to see become more prominent in the music, not because it wasn't relevant, not because it wasn't real, not because it wasn't there. It is because it was promoted, right? More and more over the consciousness that was starting to uplift our community. So the minister goes on the all men's
All
meeting
men.
through major cities right after the Stop the Killing tour, and then this is in the mid '90s,
Right. This is
leading all the way
91
up.
to
This is 91, 92, 93, particularly 93, 94,
that's right.
and then leading up to 1995, which is a very historic milestone in hip hop music, right? And then also in the ministry and the work of the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan. The reason why I say it's so historic is because the golden age of hip hop that saw conscious rap music really hit the forefront with groups like Public Enemy and Eric B. and Rakim and KRS-One started in like 84, 85, and
Hmm.
went all the way through 1995. And I would say a pivot point for the golden age of hip hop, this is just my opinion, stopped in 1998 with several albums, one of which in particular, I want to note is the Miseducation of Lauryn Hill, kind of
Mm.
pivoted hip hop music into a different era, right? But I just want to mark the golden age of hip hop. But what we also saw is the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan call for 1 million black men during this time
Yes,
to
sir.
go to Washington, D.C. on their own dime, right, for reconciliation, responsibility, and to restore their communities on the principle of atonement. So on October 16th, 1995, 1.8 million, round that up, 2 million black men went to Washington, D.C. on a Monday on their own dime and participated in the largest, most peaceful movement and rally in the history of the United States, to hear from the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan. So we're scratching our head. I went to the Million Man March. He gave a call a little over a year earlier for 1 million men to come with him to Washington, D.C. And people are trying to figure out, well, how did that happen? Because it was already in the music, right? His word, the power, and those that were putting his message in the music heard his call and were inclined to it. And if it were not for hip hop music and other mediums of exchange of thought and ideas, the Million Man March may not have been what it was. But we know that all praise is due to Allah because of hip hop music, but more because of God's word in the mouth of the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan, and his bold representation of it is the reason why that was so successful.
Man, brother, that was a beautiful answer, and I like where you placed that, because I wanted to talk about the Million Man March for a minute and how significant it was, because at that time a lot of people don't know, again, how influential the minister was, even working behind the scenes with the hip hop artists. You had a lot of hip hop artists who were at the Million Man March, number one. You also had the minister prior to the Million Man March in 95, 93, 94, could possibly be earlier, but also working out a lot of the hip hop beefs, right? The minister was quietly participating and conducting conflict resolution in our community, specifically with a lot of our hip hop artists and rappers, because why? They have influence over the young people. They have influence over the young black men who the minister already have said the government has in their crosshairs. So we have to stop them from beefing so that the beef doesn't spill out into the streets, which will actually help the enemy's cause in destroying us. So the minister goes to work, and this is why when you come into this understanding and you come into this knowledge, then it's hard for you to hear when people say, well, what has the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan done from our people? You know, and they try to put these other people out there and say, yeah, them people speak well, they teach well, that's beautiful. But the minister has been doing so many different things. He's been actively engaged in a battle with the most powerful nation on the planet in the last 6,000 years, protecting us. And he's making strategic chess moves against this nation, against this enemy, on our behalf. So the minister's at hip hop summits. You know, he's in the background. He's conducting conflict resolution, you know, with the hip hop artists, you know, stopping beefs and things like that. Then, as you mentioned, we get to the Million Man March. 2 million black men show up on a Monday on their own dime to join the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan. This, in the eyes of the enemy, signified the influence and the term I want to use. Well, I'm gonna just stick with influence that the minister had with our brothers in the hip hop community, with our brothers in the sub gang culture and things of that nature. This was like the crowning moment of it, and put it on display for the world to see who was listening to who. And as you mentioned, the masses of the people were listening to Farrakhan, are listening to Farrakhan. And at that time, it put the world on notice that the minister was a very important and influential speaker, leader, but guide to Black America. So could you talk about the impact of the Million Man March, and if you can recall some of the nostalgic feeling that you had being in that particular moment, in that historic event?
Absolutely. You know, but there's one point that I want to make too.
Yes, sir.
All of this is happening. All of this is happening in spite of the most expensive, complicated, complex, and intense smear campaign that the media has ever waged on any black man ever.
Come on now. Come on now. Now you got to bring
Right?
that part
So we're
into it. Yes,
talking.
sir.
So we're talking about from 1984, the 11 years between 1984 and 1985. The media was all over the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan,
That's right.
calling him an anti-Semite, right? Calling him a bigot, a hater. He was on the cover of Time
Time
magazine,
Magazine, the Minister of Hate. Mm-hmm.
Ministry of Rage,
Rage. Yes,
right?
sir.
Um, he was
The
he
Black
was
Hitler.
the he was called things, disgusting things like the new Black Hitler.
Right.
Who do you
Right.
want? Farrakhan.
Farrakhan.
How do you want him? Dead.
Dead. That's right.
They were members of the Jewish community
The
were posted
JDL.
up protesting outside of many of the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan's lectures. Um, the
That's
Jewish
right.
Defense League, the ADL, the Village Voice, all these media and anti-black, anti-Farrakhan organizations all joined forces in this 11-year period, right? But as Nas's untitled track on his untitled album goes, they did not stop. They have the power to stop Minister Farrakhan because his word and his work was already in and amongst the people. See, we know and we're
Mm.
taught that if the people are with you, it doesn't matter who in the power structure is
Is
against
against you.
you. And
Right.
then more importantly, if God is with you, it doesn't matter if everybody is against you. So not only is God with the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan, the people, the masses of the people are with the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan, and particularly black and brown people who are the focal point of his work.
Right.
And so when we see the Million Man March happen, we're talking about people who were sworn enemies,
Mm.
who would never have walked on the same side of the block together, are all on the mall, right? And not one incident of one. We're talking about black men who were deemed to be savage,
Mm-hmm.
absentee fathers,
Right.
prone to violence,
Right.
gun toting, drug using,
Right.
womenizing individuals were all on that mall and was an example not only to America but to the whole world of what is actually possible under the call and the word of God through an individual, through an instrument to the masses of the people, much like
Mm.
what hip hop music is. And you have to understand the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan said one hip hop song is worth 1,000 of his lectures.
Mm-hmm.
So if one man can call 2 million to show up, right? He never went against hip hop music or the artists in the subject matter or the content in their music. He never denigrated them. He just made an example of a clean glass versus a dirty glass, and condemned the act, but
That's
never
right.
condemned the individuals.
That's
And
right.
so that's the same way he went after our people, never condemned us as people, but condemned the condition and condemned the act, and then pointed out the root of the problem and that we were victims of circumstance, but righteous by nature,
Yes, sir.
right? A lot of people didn't understand what the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan, why he would even say something like that. But the Million Man March proved that we're righteous by nature, right? It's the
Mm.
environment, right?
Yes,
If we
sir.
put it, if the proper word and the proper guidance is given to us, and we're put in the proper environment
Mm.
to act in accordance to our nature,
Nature.
we can accomplish much. So when I showed up to the mall on the morning of October 16th, I just, it was so surreal. I was numb to the enormity of that event for
Yes, sir.
years, because
Yes,
I
sir.
remember turning around at 10 o'clock and 11 o'clock, and it was a lot of brothers out there, but about 12, 1, 2 o'clock, I turned around and there were men as like a sea, like an ocean,
Wow.
literally. as far as I could see in any direction. We were so densely tight together in concert with each other that it didn't even feel like at certain points that I was actually standing up on my own. We were like pressed against each other, holding each other up.
Wow.
And the love and the spirit, God was in that. I'm talking about the spirit and the energy and how we treated and how we communicated and how we talked to one another and how we were so in love with each other that day. It simply was a glimpse of heaven,
Yes,
and
sir.
it was clear that, and I remember looking up in the sky on that day, and I was like, where if there was ever any doubt that the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan was God's man, that doubt has been eliminated
Yes,
today.
sir.
Like it's obvious.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Oh man, thank you, brother Jamal. And me just listening to you talk about it, I feel like I was there. And every time I hear these stories, I watch the documentary that was put together featuring interviews of the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan, where he's describing, what led up to the Million Man March, all of the LOCs, local organizing committees that were involved, and the morning of the march and everything like that. So just to hear it from your perspective and others makes me feel like I was literally there. And then when you see pictures of it, it's like, wow, I can actually feel like I was there in the moment. I want to give some shout outs to some of the family that's checked in, man. My brother Bam from Texas, man. Shout out to him. Good brother, always a supporter of the show, man. He got the black fist up in the building, man. Shout out to my brother Bam. And he's a Dallas Cowboy fan, so that's twice the homie right there. And then we got members of the collective in the building. Shout out to Sister Tamara. She gives the greetings, brother Jamal, of Assalamu Alaikum, from the mighty Mosque number 1 all the way coming from Mecca, Detroit. Then we have, yes, sir, Detroit. Got Detroit in the building. Then we have the good brother Malcolm Flex, who also sends the greetings coming by way of the West Coast, brother. All the way from L.A., man, giving my brother the greetings. He's tapped in. Brother Malcolm Flex. Yes, sir, a.k.a. Malcolm Flex TV. And then, of course, we got our good sister, Sister Alexia Intellilex. She's up out of Philly, the city of brotherly love, Philadelphia, checking in with the family. So just want to give a couple of shout outs for those who are just tuning in. This is Shifting the Culture podcast. I'm your host, Brother King Cam, and this is my good brother and special guest, Brother Student Minister Jamoul Muhammad, who is taking us through hip-hop right now. And hip-hop turning 50, the Farrakhan Factor. So just to bring y'all up to speed, man, we started with hip-hop, with the birth of hip-hop, out of the Boogie Down. And then we talked about how that correlated with the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan, him actually being born in the Bronx as well. And then his ministry in rebuilding the work of the Most Honorable Elijah Muhammad, starting in the late 70s and then up and through the 80s, where there was a lot of political things going on. The minister putting us on notice and warning us about the plot that the government had against our people, specifically young black men. And then how the minister message infused into the hip hop to the young brothers who was listening to the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan. They took his message and put it into the music. And then you had your Rakims and your Public Enemies and your Grandmaster Flashes and all of those people who were influenced by the minister putting the music into hip hop. And now you have a synergy that's moving throughout the early 80s, late 80s, early 90s. And now we culminating at the Million Man March right now. And we're talking about the impact of the Million Man March. So what I want to do now, because this is a very, very important point. Now, me and Brother Jamal are in the southern region here in Atlanta, Georgia, under the leadership of Student Minister Abdul Sharif Muhammad, who's the Southern Regional Minister. And he was the supreme captain of the Nation of Islam at that time.
That's right.
And from what Minister Sharif has shared with myself and Brother Jamal, operating on the security side of the Million Man March, he talked about how, number one, The ministers mentioned this as well. But all of the officials, all of the national or federal officials in Washington, D.C. got out of town that day.
That's right.
The president of the United States was not in Washington, D.C. on that day. He left.
That's right.
He left. And all his top officials left as well. But the second thing was what Minister Sharif describes to us, because he sat down with all of the heads of all of the law enforcement agencies, federal, state, local. He sat down with all of those heads of law enforcement, and he let us know that the U.S. military and other heads of law enforcement were monitoring the Million Man March, waiting for an incident to happen so that they can use it as an excuse to attack us at the march. This is actual facts. This is actual facts.
It's documented.
Documented that this was the case. You know,
that's right.
So this was very important because, you know, Brother Jamal, you could speak to this on your way up to the march, probably hearing some of the things that the brothers were saying and the sentiment behind the going to the march, and some of the things, as we talked about earlier, the media's portrayal of the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan at that time. The brothers were in a joyous mood, but also in a very stern, serious mood, because the atmosphere was so thick that we didn't know what to expect going to the march from the enemy. We didn't know what to expect, and at that point, we were so together in unity that the brothers was willing to do whatever we needed to do together to protect the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan.
But you know what's really interesting is that even though we knew, some of us that did know, right?
Yes, sir.
What was at stake, right? What was possible?
Yes, sir.
It never really became the prominent thought.
Yes, sir.
Because the spirit and the love amongst the men on that day was such in unity and such intertwined in love in the moment that if we thought about it, we wasn't worried about it.
Right. Come on.
Because we had each other.
That's right.
Right? Like
unity.
Nino and G Money, we all we got, right?
Yes, sir.
And so there was never, and the best way that I could put it, there was so much love that there was not ever an inclination of fear of anything.
That's right.
We were totally focused on what we came to hear, and we were holding each other accountable to making sure that we were all present mentally and spiritually to come to stay present to get what we came to get, right?
Yes,
And you know, we've talked to, you know, Student Minister Regional Minister Abdul Sharif Muhammad, and we've heard the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan even say that the military were in the underground tunnels.
That's right.
Ready to come out.
Yes,
and to deal with us if something were to have happened, right?
Yes, sir.
And you know, but it was just so far from the mind on that day, because we literally all came to hear from the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan.
Absolutely.
And you know, one of the things that, you know, a lot of people you know, I don't hear it talked about a lot is, like, at a certain point in the day, you know, brothers and sisters was getting up to speak, and it was so many beautiful, wonderful people from the leadership of the Black community that was present and spoke, and that the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan and the organizers of the march allowed to speak for as long as they wanted to.
Yes, sir.
But it was at a certain point. We want Farrakhan. So the opposite of what we heard from those that picketed the minister.
Yes, sir.
Right. At some of his lectures at arenas around the country, we heard the opposite of that from 2 million Black men in concert. We want Farrakhan.
Yes, sir.
So I mean, it was such an illuminating event, and we left with such a high sense of purpose and going back into our communities and making it safer and a more
Decent
decent
place to
place
live.
to live, that crime went down all over America.
Wow.
Adoption rates of black children went up all over America.
Voter
Black
registration.
churches, voter registration, black
Yep.
churches, black
Memberships
organizations, memberships
increased.
skyrocketed.
That's right.
You can see the advent of black mega churches in some of the major cities in the United States after the Million Man March start to take root.
That's right.
Because the federal government called on some of the biggest preachers and gave faith-based
Money.
donations from the
That's right.
federal government to fund the growth of their ministries in these churches, just to contend with the power and the influence of the Nation of Islam and the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan.
That's right.
And it's so many stories of how the enemy went to work back into these communities to neutralize the impact of the Million Man March.
Yes, sir.
It's an incredible. Same thing with hip hop music,
Yes,
right?
sir. Yes, sir.
There was a concerted effort to block certain artists out and to promote certain artists and other content into the airways, right? Some of our most impactful artists, like a Public Enemy, I like to use them as an example, didn't get much radio play, but sold millions and millions of copies of records. Just like the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan, at a certain point, they stopped interviewing him
Right.
because
Hold on, brother Jamal. Hold on. Because you're going a little ahead now. Because I want to get there. We want to get there. So look, family.
I'm getting excited.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. I got you. So look, family. So right now we are, like I said, we just touched on the Million Man March and the effect of the Million Man March, and what Brother Jamal was alluding to was the fact that now the world is on notice. And the world has seen on display what black men are able to do with what Brother Jamal mentioned, coupled with the right word and the proper environment. What is the nature of the black man? So this is on display on national TV. I didn't go to the Million Man March, but I remember sitting in the living room and my grandmother had it on because it was being played on CNN or C-SPAN, one of the two. So you was able to see this event on television, right? So off of the heels of that, as Brother Jamal was just saying, now there's a concerted effort to thwart the efforts of the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan. Black people in the community, they start to move on hip hop as well at the same exact time after 1995 and the Million Man March. So, Brother Jamal, go ahead. Could you go ahead and now talk about the moves that was made to stop the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan and how they mimic those exact same moves in hip hop?
Yeah, so what we started to see is where the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan was a prominent, and I don't want to limit him to this, but I want to say this just for the point, personality on media outlets to be interviewed. He was in rotation.
Yes,
They
sir.
stopped interviewing the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan because what they started to see that his magnetic message and the ability to speak to the hearts and minds of our people, even in the midst of direct opposition on
Right.
some of these media outlets,
Right.
right, was making him more popular and influential because truth was rising, the cream was rising to the top, and people were seeing the message and feeling the message. Same thing with hip hop music, right? So you started to see after 1995, another jolt of positive, hip hop started to, make its way back into the forefront with certain artists. One of my favorite hip hop group, Outkast, right, from Atlanta.
Right.
Their second studio album was AT Aliens, right?
Yes,
A
sir.
very, very, very conscious album that was reminiscent of the of 10 years earlier. That album was released in 1996, and and you can hear elements of the music. Believe the Nation of Islam, which is a Big Boy line, and on that whole album, and people started to mention the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan's name more prominently in the music, and mention the Million Man March even, and then you started to have other genres of hip hop music start to be financed a little bit more, right? A little bit more aggressively. So now we started to try to take attention off the consciousness. One of my mentors in Islam is is Minister Emeritus Don Muhammad.
Yes,
and he
sir.
talked about in Boston how President Clinton came to Boston because of the violent crime rate for violent homicide and violent crimes went down to almost single digits. It was in double digits
Wow.
from being triple digits in a small city like Boston. And
Wow.
President Clinton came and gave the mayor of Boston an accommodation for the crime reduction. But that was as a result of years and years of work in the streets that involved the Nation of Islam and a coalition of allies through the churches, the law enforcement, in the public school system. And it was called the Boston Miracle, similar to our minister here,
Wow.
Brother Sharif, in Washington, D.C., with the
The
Miracle
dope
at
buster.
Mayfair Mansion.
Yes, sir.
But they took the narrative and they took the credit and blocked out the involvement of the Nation of Islam in these great feats in these cities, and in crime reduction and conflict resolution in cities like Washington, D.C. and Boston and other cities, and gave the credit to somebody else, right?
Wow.
And finance that part of it, finance a false narrative. And we started to see that in hip hop. Like when we started talking about just the record deals that the brothers and sisters was getting, right? And getting caught up into these bottomless pits of debt and trying to recoup money and having to do shows and
Yes, sir.
different things. So now it began to be more of a money grab
Right.
versus a cultural renaissance.
Yes, sir.
To uplift that was more in line with the message of the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan. We see the same thing that people started to write books and print articles and put together programs to go to other cities. This is how you stop crime, but you can't do that without the work of the love of the people
Right.
that
Yes,
is
sir.
trained in the members of the Nation of Islam and other organizations that are at the forefront on the grassroots level, knocking on doors and teaching and training people up against their real opposition, which is not each other. So the same thing is happening on both fronts. And so when you start to, as we start to gravitate, year after year away from the great impact of the Million Man March, you see the enemy, really try to unravel all the positive things that was even questioning, what did we do with all the money, even though,
Right.
there were more than one public accounting firms that audited the books, and we put the results of the audit on display.
On display.
They said, right? They said it's public, it's documented. You can go look at the audit that we actually lost money.
That's
funding
right. That's right. That's
funding
actual
the
facts.
Million Man March,
That's
right?
documented. Yeah.
That's documented, but it's the narrative, just like the fake East Coast and West Coast beef.
Talk about
That
it.
was just a disagreement between two brothers who had a misunderstanding, but they financed the most negative side of that whole narrative and got you believing something that and had us believing something that wasn't really
Even true.
even true. Man,
Yes,
we
sir.
love each other, especially in hip hop, East Coast and West Coast, right?
Yes, sir.
Man, we
Yes,
love
sir.
each other. I mean, brothers love Cool G rap as well as Snoop Dogg, right?
Absolutely.
If it's good music, it's good music.
That's right. That's
So,
right. And I heard,
so
I've even heard some of the artists, even when you talk about that East Coast and West Coast beef, and I can't remember which magazine it was. I don't know if it was it Ebony or the Jet, or who was that magazine that published that famous East Coast West Coast beef. Either way, the artist, which magazine was it?
I'm not sure.
I can't remember either, but the artist talked about how they didn't even know that was going to be the cover. Like they put that cover out, unbeknownst to the artist, you know, to add fuel to the fire, right? To try to create a narrative, as you mentioned earlier, financing false narratives, to try to finance a false narrative of East Coast and West Coast beef that ultimately led to the untimely death of Tupac, who I got the shirt on right now, and then of course the Notorious B.I.G., which is my favorite rapper of all time.
Who both spoke highly of the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan
Yes,
in their
sir.
music.
Yes, sir. Absolutely. So, you know, that's another example. So as we get into 97, 98, as you mentioned, 98 being that turning point, and then you get into a whole nother era of music or genre of music where you start to see a pivot in hip hop more away from consciousness and more into other things. Then you get into the 2000s and things of that nature. And it wasn't until, because you talked about also how the minister had been taken off on mainstream platforms, because when people go back and look at those legendary Donahue interviews where the minister is whooping up on Donahue, and he did 1, 2, 3, I believe it was 3 interviews with 3 or 4 interviews with Phil Donahue. The minister was masterful in all of those, and they pulled him off of mainstream media. So it wasn't until the advent of social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, where now the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan is back in front of the masses of the people. Wasn't until social media where the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan was able to come out of the prison that the enemy had placed him in. In 94, the minister talked about the imprisonment of the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan. It was a 94 Easter lecture, right? Where the minister talked about that and how they were attacking him in the media. Well, that message also translated or transcended into the prison that they tried to put him in after they took him off of mainstream media, figuring that if we get him out of the public eye, he'll just go away. His influence will go away. The effect will go away. But then guess what? Social media comes, and now we able to share the messages of the minister to millions and millions of people now, not just talk about it in our kitchen tables, you know, but we can share it all across the world. And now that busts the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan out of that prison, and his influence is still there. The impact is still there. And the people now, the new generation who didn't hear the minister because of the quote unquote blackout, now have an opportunity to hear the words of the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan straight from his mouth. And now they can juxtapose that to what the enemy has been saying about the minister. And now the minister is back out again. And now he's touching the masses of the people. So now we're in the 2000s and things of that nature. So could you talk about where hip hop is at this point, and then the work of the enemy and crafting hip hop to what you see today, the product that they put before us today in 2023?
Yeah, you know, it's I call, you know, the term is called benign neglect. When you act like something ain't there, and you ignore it, like it's gonna go away.
Yes, sir.
But the alternative to the alternative side to benign neglect is that, you know, you start to build a momentum up for that which you are ignoring to make a furious comeback, right?
Yes, sir.
You know, and burst out of, like you said, a prison.
Yes,
and
sir.
that's what we saw with the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan in the early 2000s. And when you start to look at hip hop music, that was some great artists and some great music being made. And what you see the likes of Jay-Z starting to really come to a forefront. But Jay-Z was a victim of benign neglect too, because nobody would sign him. So what did he have to do? He had to become basically an independent artist in order to garner enough credibility and financial viability for Def Jam and to sign him to, I don't know if it was even a production or a distribution deal under Rockefeller Records. I think it was a joint venture in the partnership.
Yes, sir.
Right. But that was all because nobody wanted to sign him, just like nobody wanted to interview the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan. But now, but the result in the music, right, was incredible. And then you start to see artists like Talib Kweli and Yasin Bey and Mos Def in the backpack rap movement. You know what I mean? With Pharoah Monch and Lupe Fiasco and
Lupe, yeah.
Kanye West,
Yes, sir.
right? You start to
Common.
see Common. He when he released, he had been out for a while, but when he released his album Like Water for Chocolate in 1999, 2000, I believe, and that album, kind of putting back in the run. You
Yes,
start
sir.
to see these artists that were ignored, like the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan, make a furious comeback. Not that the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan ever went anywhere, but
Right.
it was the recoil of the benign neglect backfiring on the enemy.
Yes, sir.
And then you start to see the independence of these artists breaking out of these whack record deals,
Right.
and then artists like Jay-Z starting to talk about these horrible record deals.
360 deals.
Right. He said, I'm overcharging people for what they did to the Cold Crush. And I'm paraphrasing the word to
Yes,
make
sir.
sure that we can stay politically correct. Right.
Right.
That's the message in the music. And then you start to see artists like Eminem and Dre pulls away from Death Row, and then he signs Eminem, and then Dre and Eminem sign 50 Cent.
Yes, sir.
So you start to see the artists themselves start to produce, distribute, and promote each other. Right. Same thing with the Nation of Islam. So you're gonna keep the minister off of the airways? Well, we have a way that we can keep him in front of you. So the Nation of Islam has its own periodical, the Final Call newspaper.
Yes, sir.
Well, you start to see hip hop music really being celebrated by its periodicals like Double XL and the Source magazine.
Come on, talk about that. Oh man, we didn't even go into the Double XL and the Source magazine and how that media, right? That hip hop, media really was impactful and powerful to putting the message out there and just celebrating black artists, right?
Right. Like
the Source. Can't forget about the Source.
If you like me, you was waiting for the new Source so that you could look at the rhyme report.
Right. Yes, sir.
Who got 5 mics? Right. Who got the 5 mics? Right. Who's arguing? Who got the verse of the month? Right.
Yes, sir.
And all of these different articles where we would get the scoop from what was going on in hip hop music directly from the artists or those close to the artists, because mainstream media wasn't covering us. The American Music Awards, MTV Music Awards wasn't awarding us equitably in our particular genre of music.
That's right.
So the walk of the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan and his example amongst us really persuaded and influenced what we saw in hip hop music. And so now we're moving through the early 2000 and 2010s, and then you start to see, all right, the enemy start to take a hold of the music again, and is really made, even up to this day, an effort to put the young, new, hungry artists up against the old, veteran, experienced artists, to really try to separate the two.
Yes,
right?
Sir.
And that's the same thing that the enemy did with the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan when Barack Obama became elected president. The word on the street, right, is the Nation of Islam and the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan relevant, right? These were the questions.
Yes, sir.
And we start to see some of our more conscious brothers start to take the limelight in the hearts and minds of Black people, like our beautiful brother Dr. Umar Johnson and,
yes, sir.
and Tariq Nasheed with the Hidden Colors series and all the great work that he's done, and others, right? You start to see, unknown forces and hands and voices come in. It was like, all right, well, we got them, then is the Nation of Islam and what the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan has been talking all these, is it even relevant anymore, right? You can see
good point.
Trying to separate, wisdom from youth and enthusiasm.
Yes,
same thing in the music, same thing in the ministry of the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan and the Nation of Islam. But in 10-10-15, you saw that come back together the youth and the active movement, especially on the heels of the Trayvon Martin murder and the Tamir Rice murder, right? And then social media really becoming the main media amongst the masses of the people.
Yes, sir.
And you see the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan create his Twitter account and change the direction, change the face of social media by allowing social media to be used for a positive, progressive, more educational platform versus just a medium to meet people and exchange, frivolous ideas. And then that culminated in 10/10/15, the 20th anniversary of the Million Man March, where you saw over 1 million people show up to Washington, D.C. on the anniversary of the Million Man March. All of which, most of which were young people that put the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan back on top, right? In the mind.
Hip hop again. It was a lot of hip hop artists there again.
A lot of hip hop artists, right? That proved that, yes, not only is he still relevant, he's very important. And then now you see the minister do 2 interviews on the Breakfast Club.
That's right. That's right.
Where now hip hop is not only the message pushing the artistic expression pushing the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan. Now the hip hop artists are the media.
Yes.
Right. DJ Envy is hip hop.
Is
Charlamagne is hip hop. Right.
Yes, sir.
Sway in the Morning
is hip hop. Joe Budden.
Right.
That's right.
Joe Budden is
right.
hip hop. Right.
Big Boy.
Big Boy is hip hop.
Yes,
and
sir.
So yesterday's artist is today's media. Nori and Drink Champs, one of my favorite platforms, is hip hop, right?
Yes, sir.
And so the name of the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan is of great importance to these young people, because these are the children of the 80s and 90s that he saved. Right. With his message to stop the killing tour, the All Men's Meeting, the Million Man March, and these are the children, these are the artists that he never condemned for what was in their music, right? I mean, he never condemned them, he condemned the action and educated and uplifted them. So now, where the enemy is still trying to attempt to smear the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan's character, it is now these same young people who are now seasoned, older, and wiser, keeping the name of the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan in the forefront. That's the power of hip hop today. For example, Nori was like, I will never go on Vlad TV again because of how he disrespected the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan through that controversy with Vlad TV, right? Nobody knew that was coming, but Nori, who is a top podcaster right now with Drink Champs, didn't appreciate it and made a stand. And then you start to see other people make stands similar to that. So I mean, we could go. That's kind of the way I see the place and the status of hip hop and the relationship with the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan, leaning all the way up until right now.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Wow, man, that was that right there, brother. That really helped bring it home for those who may not have known. And this conversation was really a shift in the culture conversation centered around hip hop and hip hop being 50, because it shows the close knit and relevancy and synergy of the messianic message and the ministry of the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan in connection with our brothers and sisters in the hip hop community, the power and the impact of the music, and why the Most Honorable Elijah Muhammad said that our unity is more powerful than an atomic bomb. And in 1995 at the Million Man March was a perfect example of that atomic force being on display of our unity in front of the masses. So this was such a powerful conversation. And I just want to thank you, Brother Jamal, for joining us here on Shifting the Culture and indulging us in this conversation, because I believe it was very much needed, And man, brother, you might have sparked a series because now I want to go a lecture series on this, brother. And some more, brother. So this right here is heavy because everything now, again, hip hop is the forefront of our culture and our community. You know, every day, you know, on social media, you're hearing something about some hip hop artists, and because hip hop artists have now been able to grow outside of the shell of just music, you know, doing TV shows, and like you said, the artists are now the media. So you know, all of these different aspects, you know, they're always constantly in headlines, right? So you know, I believe it is important now to be able to speak to hip hop and speak towards hip hop and what's happening now and how we could bring it back into what the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan was able to do with it in the 90s and all the way up until recently, because you have artists like Kanye West, 2 Chainz, Rose, prominent artists, big time artists, Jay-Z, who have mentioned the minister's name, have famous lines about the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan. Kanye West said, you know, he called the minister sensei, right? So, you know, you have these artists.
Jesus Walks at Mos Mariam.
He performed Jesus Walks at Mos Mariam. So we see the influence still there in the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan. And I think it's on us now as his students to continue that work and stand in hand and shoulder to shoulder with our brothers in the hip hop community. And this is how we save and take back our community from the enemy. So, Brother Jamoul, do you have anything you would like to say before we close out, brother? How do the people stay in contact with you, tap in with you on social media and things of that nature?
Yes, you can find me and follow me on Instagram. I'm most active on Instagram at King Akeem 21.
Yes, sir.
And if you're in the Atlanta area, please stop by Muhammad Mosque, number 15, the Southern Regional Headquarters of the Nation of Islam, under the guidance of the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan through his Southern Regional Minister Abdul Sharif Muhammad. And, you know, I just wanted to say a few words just for the naysayers out there, or anybody that, you know, may not understand this conversation and why we're having it, right? Because some people, you know, we love the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan. People think we just tripping just because of how much we love him, right? He literally saved my life, right?
Yes, sir.
And so I can understand why that view may be in your head. But I encourage everybody to fact check, you know, what I said, right? Hit me up if I didn't say something correct, right? Everything's up for discussion.
Yes, sir.
But dig deeper before you do so, because the connection of the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan is really deep. We only scratched the surface tonight. And I don't want to leave this conversation without really just taking you a little deeper, right? In the 70s, when the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan was the lead minister over Muhammad Mosque number 7 in Harlem, New York City. You know, he was over 18 satellite mosques plus the headquarters mosque. So that's 19 mosques. He had over 5,000 followers, and he was on the radio 6 times a week representing the most honorable Elijah Muhammad. And this is in New York in the 70s.
Yes, sir.
Where hip hop originated.
Yes,
so
sir.
His representation of these very teachings that we just walk so carefully through, that has been so impactful all the way up to 2023. This is the same man who had the same similar influence in the 70s in New York City, in the very place where hip hop was originated. And, you know, we affectionately call him the godfather of hip hop, because you heard Brother King Cam talk earlier about it's the Farrakhan Factor, because the atmosphere was pregnant with the word of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad coming through the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan.
Yes,
and
sir.
so we know and we believe that he created the atmosphere that made it possible for young brothers and sisters to come together, in particular Kool Herc, Africa Bambaataa, and DJ Grandmaster Flash, the big 3 that helped create the elements of hip hop that we now celebrate as the most exported American commodity, Black culture through hip hop across the whole world. The Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan was right there in the beginning. We're not saying he invented hip hop, but we're saying he influenced its creation because of the truth and his ability to represent. And if you don't believe me, just go to lyrics.com. There's 365 songs that reference the name Farrakhan. And there's
Wow.
so many artists. There's so many references to him and the Nation of Islam all throughout music from many different artists in hip hop that are very diverse in their approach to hip hop, but they all talk about the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan. So I just encourage you to look deeper into this subject matter and really take a closer look at the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan, because, like I said at the beginning of the broadcast, not only has he influenced hip hop, he's influenced every aspect of Black life through the 60 plus years of his ministry, especially since post 1975, after the fall of the Nation of Islam, in his efforts to rebuild it. So,
Yes,
man,
sir.
I thank you. I thank you all for listening. And if I said anything that'll make you listen to hip hop music a little differently, and if I said anything to encourage you to go and listen to the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan, I did my job tonight. So I appreciate the opportunity.
Yes, sir. Absolutely, man. Thank you, Brother Jamal, again for joining us, family. And if you would like to be a part of our text community, you can text STC podcast to 888-294-2793. It is scrolling across the bottom. All you have to do is text the word STC podcast to 888-294-2793. Become a part of our community so that you can stay updated on the latest episodes, live shows, events, if you're traveling, guests, all of that different stuff, and mainly being able to take our conversations offline, because we know the censorship is real when it comes to these social media platforms as well. So us being
That's
able
right.
to have these shifting the culture conversations offline so that we're able to open up the conversation so that we can really, really dig deep. So thank you again, family, for coming through. I'm your host, Brother King Cam, and this is Shifting the Culture Podcast. Appreciate you for coming through, family. Peace and blessings. Assalamu alaikum.